Welcome. You've come to rest, perhaps settling into a quiet evening or preparing to drift into sleep. Tonight, we will travel together into one of the more curious and quietly haunting corners of human history. It is a story that might, at first, sound strange, even whimsical. An epidemic where people laughed uncontrollably, not because of joy, but because of something far more mysterious. The tale is known today as the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962, a curious phenomenon in which laughter spread from person to person, in waves that disrupted entire communities. And yet, when we step back, when we examine this event through the eyes of the people who lived at that time, we see more than laughter. We see fear, uncertainty, exhaustion, and the fragility of life in a moment of deep transition. But before we arrive at that unsettling moment, let us first set the scene. Let us imagine the daily life of the region, what it meant to rise with the sun, to work, to eat, to speak, to laugh in ordinary ways. For only by entering into the rhythm of everyday existence can we understand how deeply unusual and troubling this strange epidemic must have been. So, close your eyes if you wish, breathe slowly, and picture yourself in Central Africa, in the early 1960s, a world at once timeless and rapidly changing. Imagine yourself standing in a village at the foot of gentle hills, in what was then called Tanganyika, and what today we know as Tanzania. The year is 1962. The sun has only just risen, casting a warm, amber light over the land. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth, carried on a soft breeze that rustles through banana leaves and tall grasses. In the mornings, life begins slowly but with purpose. Women rise early to fetch water, balancing clay or tin containers upon their heads with practiced grace. The paths they walk are narrow, worn smooth by generations of bare feet. Along the way, they greet neighbors quietly, their voices low and steady, almost blending into the natural rhythm of bird calls that echo through the trees. Fires are lit, smoke rising in thin, wavering streams, carrying with it the faint aroma of wood and millet porridge. Children, their laughter normally quick and light, stir sleepily, their hair tousled, their eyes bright but still heavy with dreams. The men gather their tools, simple hoes, machetes, or fishing nets, and move toward their work, whether tending the fields, casting lines into rivers, or mending what needs repair. There is a rhythm to this life, a balance of labor and rest. In the fields, cassava and maize grow beneath the steady sun. Women bend low to weed, their hands brushing the soil, feeling its firmness or its dryness, always gauging what the land might give. Men carry baskets heavy with harvests, or poles with nets strung across their shoulders, the smell of fish clinging faintly as they return home in the evenings. Food is shared communally. A bowl of porridge, perhaps flavored with greens or beans, sustains the body. Meals are eaten without haste, with the murmur of conversation blending with the ever-present hum of insects in the background. And yet, life in Tanganyika in 1962 was not only traditional. The country had only recently declared independence, just a year earlier, in 1961. The colonial era was fading, but its echoes remained. In towns and schools, European influences were visible. In clothing, in institutions, in the structures of authority. English mingled with Swahili, alongside dozens of local tongues. For young people, especially in schools, this was a time of tension and change. The old ways pressed gently against the new. In classrooms, students sat in neat rows, reciting lessons, striving for discipline under the watchful eyes of teachers. The walls might have been bare, the chalk squeaking faintly as a hand moved across the board. Outside, the natural world continued its eternal rhythm, goats bleating, distant drums calling, winds carrying the smell of rain. There was laughter here, of course. Laughter that was light, ordinary, human. Children giggling as they played tag through dusty paths. Friends teasing each other at the water's edge. Evenings filled with stories told by elders, punctuated with smiles, chuckles, and knowing looks. It was laughter as you and I would know it, gentle, controlled, part of the flow of life. And so, when laughter began to escape these boundaries, when it spread beyond control, when it ceased to be joyful and became something else entirely, It struck those who lived here as deeply strange. It was as if one of the most ordinary, comforting rhythms of their lives had been stolen from them, reshaped into something unfamiliar, even frightening. But that part of the story lies ahead. For now, hold the picture of Tanganyika in your mind. The slow mornings, the warmth of the sun on your skin, the hum of life all around, the balance of labor and laughter. A balance that, soon, would be broken. Picture again the small schoolhouse in Tanganyika, early in the year 1962. It was here, in a rural girls' boarding school, that the strange outbreak first began. The school itself was modest. Simple wooden walls, perhaps corrugated metal roofing, its classrooms filled with rows of desks worn smooth by years of use. The chalkboard bore neat lines of lessons, and the air was still, save for the sounds of chalk scratching and the murmurs of children repeating their lessons. And then, quite suddenly it began. 3 young girls started to laugh. At first, it seemed harmless, an ordinary ripple of amusement in a classroom. Perhaps a private joke, a small disruption. But the laughter did not fade. Instead, it deepened, rolling out in waves that grew louder, stranger, more uncontrollable. Soon, others joined in. Their bodies shook, tears ran from their eyes, but the laughter kept coming, beyond their will. Some laughed for hours. Some for days. Teachers, baffled, tried to restore order, but the laughter was relentless, spreading from one student to the next, until the classroom dissolved into chaos. This was not the soft, playful laughter of ordinary joy. It was a laughter that exhausted the body, leaving the girls trembling, unable to eat or sleep. Some fainted. Some wept even as they laughed. And yet the sound went on, echoing down the hallways. The outbreak did not remain contained within the school. Within weeks, it had spilled outward, traveling along the threads of human connection. Students carried it home to their villages. Soon, whole communities began to feel its grip. It moved unpredictably, appearing in one cluster, then fading, only to emerge in another place. The epidemic spread across the region for months. In some cases, the laughter fits lasted a few minutes. In others, they persisted for hours at a time. Some victims collapsed, unable to breathe properly. Others experienced strange symptoms alongside the laughter: crying, fainting, rashes, even sudden fear or aggression. It is said that as many as 1,000 people were affected. Schools closed. Villages disrupted their daily routines. Normal life, with its steady rhythm of farming, cooking, trading, and resting, was disturbed by the unpredictable outbursts. Imagine, for a moment, what it must have felt like to live in one of these villages. You wake to the sound of morning as usual, the crow of a rooster, the rustle of trees in the wind. And then, from the house next door, you hear it. Not the gentle laughter of a neighbor at play, but an endless stream of hysterical sounds, growing louder, refusing to stop. You glance nervously at your own children, wondering if it will come for them next. Parents grew fearful. Teachers despaired. The epidemic puzzled local authorities and eventually drew the attention of colonial medical officers and missionaries. Some described it as a kind of mass hysteria. Others wondered if it was linked to stress, to the pressures of independence, or to deep cultural anxieties. But at the time, explanations did little to ease the lived reality. What people saw, what they heard, what they endured, was a strange and relentless laughter that could not be tamed. The laughter epidemic rose and fell over the course of nearly 2 years, moving across villages, even shutting down entire schools. And then, as strangely as it had arrived, it faded. By 1964, the fits had largely disappeared, leaving behind stories, memories, and unanswered questions. To this day, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic remains one of the most curious episodes in medical history. But for those who lived it, it was not curiosity. It was disruption. It was fear. It was an invasion into the most ordinary parts of life, transforming one of humanity's most comforting expressions into something frightening and strange. As we move forward, let us step back and consider the deeper context. What were the possible causes? What cultural interpretations arose? And why does this event still puzzle us more than 60 years later? When we look back at the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962, We do not simply see a medical oddity. We see an event that sits at the crossroads of science, psychology, and culture. To this day, there is no single explanation that fully captures its cause. Instead, there are theories, each with its own quiet logic. One explanation offered by doctors at the time was mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass hysteria. In this view, the laughter was not the result of a virus or bacteria, but of the human mind itself, responding to stress in ways that the body could not control. Such outbreaks have occurred throughout history: mysterious dances, fainting spells, trembling, or fits that spread through communities, especially in moments of uncertainty. And indeed, Tanganyika in 1962 was a land in transition. Independence had just been achieved. The colonial order, with its rigid rules and hierarchies, had suddenly lifted, leaving in its place both a sense of hope and a shadow of anxiety. For young people, particularly those in schools where discipline was strict, this may have created pressures too great to bear. Laughter, in this sense, was not a sign of joy, but a release of tension. But this is only one way of seeing. Another perspective comes from the cultural context itself. In many African traditions, laughter and weeping are understood not simply as emotions, but as forces that can ripple through communities. Some villagers believed that the epidemic might have been caused by spirits or by a curse. To them, the laughter was not random, but a kind of message, an unsettling disturbance in the harmony between the human and the unseen world. Anthropologists who later studied the event noted how the laughter mirrored older stories of spirit possession and collective trance. Just as a song or a rhythm of drums could move a crowd into altered states, so too could laughter spread, unstoppable, beyond the control of any one individual. From another angle, we can also look at the biology of laughter itself. Laughter is contagious in nearly every culture. When you hear it, your own body responds. The corners of your mouth twitch, your chest stirs, your breath changes. Scientists suggest that this may be an ancient survival mechanism. Laughter bonds groups, eases conflict, and signals safety. Yet here, in Tanganyika, the very mechanism of bonding became instead a mechanism of breakdown. Some researchers wonder if the epidemic was, in part, an amplification of this natural contagion, set loose in an environment primed for stress, anxiety, and transition. The mystery deepens when we place this event beside others in history. We recall the dancing plagues of medieval Europe, where people danced until collapse, unable to stop. We recall outbreaks of fainting or trembling in schools across Asia or Africa, often during times of political or cultural upheaval. In each case, the body seems to carry the weight of history itself, expressing it through movement, sound, or laughter. And so, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic remains a puzzle, not because it lacks possible explanations, but because no explanation feels complete. Was it stress? Was it spirit? Was it the mind's hidden language, speaking through the body? Perhaps it was all of these at once. What we know is this: for those who endured it, the laughter was real. Their bodies shook, their voices cried out, their lives were disrupted. Theories may bring comfort to outsiders looking back, but for the villagers themselves, the experience was lived, not theorized. And perhaps that is why the story still lingers. Because laughter, one of the simplest, most universal of human sounds, became here a mirror of fear, of change, of uncertainty. And that transformation, of joy into unease, touches something deep within us, even across time. As we leave behind the mysteries of culture and science, let us turn finally to the wider world, to how leaders, missionaries, colonial authorities, and outsiders looked upon this epidemic. For while villagers wept and laughed uncontrollably, others saw in it something quite different, something to be studied, reported, even ridiculed. Imagine again the quiet villages of Tanganyika, the laughter echoing across courtyards, fields, and schoolrooms. For those who lived within its reach, it was frightening, exhausting, and disruptive. But for outsiders looking in, the epidemic carried an entirely different meaning. Colonial authorities, though the era of direct rule was ending, still maintained a presence. Missionaries, medical officers, and administrators heard reports of villages thrown into disorder by unstoppable laughter. To them, it seemed puzzling, perhaps even faintly ridiculous. Many dismissed it as nothing more than an oddity, an amusing footnote in the fading days of empire. Medical officers tried to classify the outbreak. They wrote clinical reports, noting the duration of fits, the number of victims, the symptoms that accompanied them. Their language was dry, detached, concerned more with data than with human experience. Where a mother might have seen her daughter collapse in exhaustion after hours of hysterical laughter, the medical report noted simply, subject presented with convulsions lasting 3 hours. In this contrast, we see how differently the event was lived and remembered. For villagers, the epidemic was disruptive to daily rhythms. Fields went untended, children could not focus in school, communal meals were delayed by sudden fits of laughter. For colonial doctors, it was a case study, a curiosity to be compared with outbreaks elsewhere. Missionaries, too, brought their own interpretations. Some framed the laughter as a sign of spiritual disturbance, perhaps even demonic influence. In their eyes, it became a struggle not of psychology, but of faith. They prayed over the afflicted, seeking to restore peace through divine intervention. To the villagers, this may have offered some comfort, or it may have seemed yet another attempt by outsiders to explain what could not be explained. Meanwhile, newspapers around the world picked up the story. In Europe, in America, the laughter epidemic appeared in small articles, often written with a tone of light amusement. Readers chuckled at the idea of an outbreak of giggles. Few paused to imagine the exhaustion of the afflicted or the disruption to entire communities. From afar, it was entertainment. Up close, it was anguish. And then there were the elites within Tanganyika itself. The country had only recently achieved independence, and leaders were striving to build a sense of stability and progress. For them, the epidemic was embarrassing, a reminder of fragility at a time when the young nation sought to project confidence. Schools were closed not only to protect students, but also to preserve order, to ensure that the image of the nation was not undermined by something so inexplicable. So we see a layered contrast. For villagers, the epidemic was lived, the sound of endless laughter in the night, the sight of neighbors collapsing, the unease of wondering who would be next. For doctors and missionaries, it was a puzzle. For foreign newspapers, it was a curiosity. And for political leaders, it was an inconvenience, a challenge to be managed quietly as the nation moved into its new identity. In the end, the laughter faded. Schools reopened. Fields returned to their rhythms. Leaders turned to other concerns. The world, as it always does, moved on. But those who had laughed uncontrollably, those who had seen their families and neighbors taken by strange fits, carried the memory. For them, it was not amusing, not simply curious, it was part of their lived history. And so, the story reminds us that history is never experienced the same way by all. One person's curiosity is another's hardship. One society's scientific puzzle is another community's disruption. The laughter epidemic of Tanganyika stands at this intersection, a reminder of how fragile the balance of daily life can be, and how differently the same event may appear depending on where one stands. Now, as we draw this journey to a close, let us gently step back from the past. Let us consider what this story means for us today, and how it lingers in our imagination. And so, the laughter faded. The Tanganyika epidemic, so disruptive and strange, eventually dissolved into memory. Villages returned to their rhythms. Children once again laughed for joy, not from compulsion. Fields were tended, water fetched, meals shared in the quiet glow of firelight. Yet the story lingers. It lingers because it reminds us of the fragility of life's balance, and of how even the most familiar human expressions can turn unfamiliar. Laughter, which usually soothes, which binds communities together, became here something unsettling. And in that transformation, we are reminded of the deep mystery of the human body, the human mind, and the societies we build around them. As you lie here now, listening, you can imagine the contrast between their world and yours. The hard earth beneath their feet, the crackle of fires in the evening, the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. Against that background, laughter became both a comfort and a threat, a reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. But your world here and now is still. You have the comfort of your own bed, the steady rhythm of your breathing, the gentle sense of safety that allows you to drift. Unlike those villagers who feared when the laughter might strike again, you can simply let go, knowing that tomorrow will arrive with calm. History is full of stories like this, stories of disruption, of mystery, of strangeness. But it is also full of resilience. People adapt, they carry on, they weave even the strangest of events into the fabric of memory. And just as the people of Tanganyika return to their lives, so too do we return, always, to our own quiet routines. So allow this story to fade now, as laughter itself faded long ago. Let it settle into the past, leaving you only with the gentle awareness of time's passing and the comfort of your own present moment. Breathe deeply. Feel the heaviness of your body. Know that the past is distant and the present is safe. And as the echoes of laughter slip away, may sleep come gently, carrying you into its quiet, dream-filled embrace. Good night.